So David Mallows from UCL Institute of Education in the United Kingdom. You are the leader of the special interest group on basic skills for integration. So how are you involved in this topic, in this theme?
Well, I've been a language teacher all my professional life. I've worked in adult education for about 30 years now. The first 10 years in private language schools teaching English as a foreign language. And then when I returned to England, I worked in community education with migrant and refugee groups in West London, and then moved into working in a big London college, and since then I've always had a connection with migrant education. I now train teachers of migrant education, we call ESOL teachers, in the UCL Institute of Education, and my research and professional interests are in language teaching. So when the SIGs were announced, it was the obvious one for me to become involved in.
Yes, and integration is an even more important, it's getting more and more important these days.
I wouldn't say it's getting more important, I'd say it's becoming more prominent.
Yes.
But it's always been important, and Europe is built on migration, and Europe's built on immigrants building new lives in new countries, and language has always been a hugely important element of that, to give them access to education, to give them access to work and engagement in their new homes.
Right, okay. You talked to a number of participants. What ideas did they bring?
They were very interesting. There was 5 different conversations in the carousel on the same subject, and all of them were different. So people brought very different perspectives. Some of them because they were working in countries that had very different experiences of migration. Some countries that had no experience at all until very recently, and others, for example, the Netherlands or the Nordic countries, where there's been immigration for a long period and they've built up some infrastructure for teaching of it. The conversations focused on 2 things. One, that what we're aiming for is to inform policy and providers essentially meaning teachers, and that we'd need to distinguish quite clearly between the guidance we give to those people. Another was that the roles that we identify within migrant education are extremely important, and that there are very differentiated roles. Not just language teacher or educator, but somebody who would give guidance, somebody who would signpost a provision, people who would provide support in other areas, people who would just provide social integration activities, cooking classes or social clubs, or lots of different roles that we would need to identify the type of input you could give for each of those groups. So all of the conversations were very interesting. They all agreed that we needed to think carefully about what sort of information we were gathering and putting together. And I think that's a question for all of the SIGs to think about. They're all huge areas. The one thing we did agree on as well was that we wouldn't focus on language pedagogy.
Yes.
In each of the countries there are language teachers, and those language teachers, they know about language pedagogy, they've been trained in that. A lot of them though have been trained in teaching languages to children in the school system. So we did come to the conclusion, and this was quite consistent in the groups, that one element, one module perhaps of the resource that we produce would need to be around adult education, so adult pedagogy or andragogy. And the other element that I think will be difficult for lots of language teachers who know how to teach languages will be how to work with migrants and refugees. That specific issue of those particular group of adults that have their own baggage, their own difficulties, and also their own challenges in integrating. And if we want to support adult education professionals in supporting those migrants in integrating, those are the elements we tend to focus on.
So these are the topics that an open online course, for example, would be interesting for.
I think so, and we also there's a number of discussions about it's a very big subject, language education or migrant education, and no one professional will need to know everything. So the idea that we might produce modular courses that had very small bits of learning, focusing on particular subjects, seemed to be far more doable, but
Yeah.
also far more useful for the field, for people to be able to access quite small pieces of learning that would move on their understanding and enable them to carry out their roles more efficiently.
Right, okay, thank you.